So I wrote about the witch in this book, and I watched interviews with Eggers from the release, and already I was kind of pissed at the way he would talk. But his whole conceit for the witch is that he's just representing how people thought at the time. And one of the problems with that film is the way that he represents how people thought at the time is there are no Native Americans, and the land's just there for you to take. And you're like, I don't know if that's you representing what the settlers thought, or if that's just what you think.
It's here. You hear what I'm telling you? In my mind, I created it. The culture, I created it, and it's real. Don't you understand?
What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Struggle Session. I'm your host, Leslie Lee III. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we have an amazing episode. I talk with writer Joshua Gooch about his new book, Capitalism Hates You, Marxism and the New Horror. If you're looking for a deep dive into some of the best new horror flicks, you're going to love this one. But before we get started, I want to thank everyone for their great feedback on our Sinners crossover episode with Bad Faith. Y'all know I love talking with Bree any chance I get. Josh, a joy as always. Great film to talk about. Had a really good time. If you haven't listened to it, please do so. And speaking of crossovers, if you have not listened to the creepy podcast Creepaway Camp, where our storytellers are sitting around a campfire telling each other horror stories in the bayou of Louisiana, but they're not alone. Things get very weird, very funny from there. I highly recommend you check it out. Some of you already have and told me how much you enjoyed it. So Creepaway Camp on the Creepy Podcast feed, absolutely free. All 9 episodes available now. So show them some love because they've shown us some love. And speaking of showing the love, welcome to our new patrons, Matthew Patrick, Rich, Random Name Generator, Steven, Dylan, Ansem, wherever you are, wherever you're doing, and welcome them to the family the right way.
Salute me, familia.
Salute.
Thank you so much for your support, for joining the family. We appreciate you. I appreciate everyone who's listening, whether it's on Spreaker, on Spotify. If you're telling a friend about it, leaving a 5-star review, that's all gravy. We love it. Hey, if you can't afford the show for any reason, just send us an email at thestrugglesession@gmail.com. We'll hook you up. But if you can, patreon.com/strugglesession. You'll get hundreds of bonus episodes, video episodes, commentaries without the interstitial ads. Please check it out if you can. And speaking of cool stuff coming up on our next episode, just a sneak preview, I'll be talking with Will Sloan. Oh yeah, the Will Sloan, about his new book, Ed Wood, Made in Hollywood, USA. Yes, we're talking about the director who was once called the worst director in all of Hollywood. But Will has a completely different, new, fresh take. Can't wait to hear it. The website is sesh.show. Send us an email or voicemail about what you think about Sinners or this episode or anything else to thestrugglesession@gmail.com. And also, just in case I missed anyone, thank you to everyone who shared and supported my GoFundMe. I really appreciate it. Your help means the world. I'm trying to beat this long COVID thing. You see what we're doing? We're flashing up the show. We're doing video now. I'm a DaVinci Pro. Okay, they know me down there at DaVinci. We're doing it. We're moving forward. We're pushing forward. And I couldn't do it without your help and without your support. So I want to thank you so much for that. But that's enough pre-ramble. Let's talk some scary movies. All right. Joshua, welcome to the show. How's it going?
Going great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for this book. It's really interesting, really fascinating. Capitalism Hates You, Marxism, and the new horror film. Joshua, why'd you write this book? Why now?
Why now? Horror has changed dramatically over the last decade, 15 years. We've got a new cycle of horror it's a production cycle, right? So instead of thinking as genre as a very static thing, we saw a massive growth in the kinds of films that are being made and the kinds of people who are allowed to make them, which has really changed what the genre looks like, and I think forces us to re-examine horror and what we think we know about horror, and also to, in the process, then rethink what we know about Marxist theory.
All right, so tell me a little bit more. What specifically you think has changed, from the 80s to the 90s to the aughts to the teens? Was there horror? I feel like I don't remember it to now.
I mean, so you've got this weird movement, I would say, in the aughts, right? Where you have, what we have, I think, right now is a production cycle of art horror, right? Which is more or less where I sort of focused my attention. And that was because we've just lived through this long process of horror becoming respectable. So it can get mass release. It's an IMAX, right? Or it's coming back to IMAX. This is all,
yes,
that's new. In a way that it wasn't before. And horror has long tried to be respectable in that way, to pull in more money. So part of it was thinking through, how did that happen and why did that happen? And a lot of it comes down to how horror has drawn in art horror, art cinema, melodrama, and the concerns of different constituencies. If you look at older versions of horror, and especially older film criticism on horror, it's very much about young white dudes wanting to see topless women and stab them. And that's sort of the way that it was seen, as a very masochistic, misogynist sort of genre. And that's not all that horror has ever been, right? It's just the way that the slasher in particular became code for all of horror. Now we see that we have really different things happening. And that starts with, we get weird and go all the way back to Von Trier and Antichrist, but I don't think we need to. But like that's, you think about like the early aughts, like that sort of art horror is happening, and then you get the Babadook, which makes a fair amount of money for very little cost, and suddenly, oh wait, we can do a lot of these, and that builds over a series of. This is how A24 gets big, but then it opens up all these different kinds of horror that can be made, that becomes marketable and budgetable, and then who gets to make it, because there's more money coming in and more opportunities for distribution. And suddenly you've got like a really, probably the only vibrant film genre, I think, going right now. Everything else is really dead, but lots of people are making and doing interesting things in horror now in a way that you're just not seeing, like film noir, westerns. These are dead genres. Horror is active in a way that nothing else is right now.
All right, that's all well and good. What the hell does a Marxist care about horror?
Well, I mean, so here's the thing. Marxist literary criticism and cultural criticism has been pretty staid. It's been pretty white. It's been pretty focused on some very limited ideas. And when you think about like what Marxism needs to do, which is to account for the experiences of people of color, the experiences of women, the crises of care, the crises of the biosphere, you have to actually expand what Marxism does. And when you look at what horror does and what it represents, right? I mean, the way that I treat horror in the book is all about our shared recognition of what scares us, right? So that's what makes horror pleasurable. You're like, that's fucking scary. And then the rest of the people in the theater say, that's fucking scary. Well, suddenly you have a shared sort of consensus of experience, like these are bad things. So horror has a way of bringing you together. Now, that doesn't have a particular politics, right? But it means that you can recognize that you have shared problems. Marxism lets us talk about those things if we use it properly by reaching out and then drawing in things like social reproduction theory, black Marxism, eco-socialism, we suddenly can make a more interesting and full account of Marxism out of it. So I think horror actually needs Marxism to explain some things, but Marxism really needs horror to make it the kind of cultural criticism it needs to be.
All right, so let's get into the book, the chapters, and I love these titles. Work hates you, love hates you, nature hates you, the neighbor hates you, commodities hate you, the family hates you, feelings hate you. You're going through all the different, kind of really visceral ways that you can categorize modern horror, and you tie each of these to specific Marxist ideas. So, is your book, please, what are some of the more interesting things? I only read half the titles. You have to get the whole book, and I highly recommend you do to get the full, the breakdown. But we're going to give you a little taste, a little snack, a little preview here.
So, like, each one of those chapters is about working through a particular theory, but trying to link it to different subgenres, right? So we've got chapters on anti-work horror. I've got feminist anti-capitalist horror. One of my favorite ones is psychedelic fungal horror, which is comes out of nature hating you. Like the idea of that there's each one of these is organized around a kind of common sense, right? So for that chapter, the common sense is we're told that our consumption is what's causing climate change. And you're like, well, it's our consumption is structured around what capitalism produces and how it produces it and how it forces us to buy things just to get through the world, right? So it's not just your consumption, it's a whole social system. It displaces that onto, like, don't you feel bad? What's your carbon footprint? Like, fuck your carbon footprint. Like, what's going on with the production of cars? How does that change how we actually get around? Those things get displaced. And so psychedelic fungal horror gives us a way to think through that tension between what's actually happening out in the world that's scary and that we don't have control over, and the things that are within our control. And you see in films like Gaia, which is this really cool South African horror, very much The Last of Us influenced, if you want to think about like fungal people coming out of the woods and going, ooh, at you.
The cordyceps virus.
Yes. And so, the zombie ant thing is, there's a lot of things with the zombie ant stuff. But for this particular film, it does a ton visually with this very small and the very big, right? To try and give you a sense of climate change. It's something that happens at a very tiny level that's not human, and at a very large level that's beyond the human. So, like, the opening of the film, you got this drone shot that takes you over the forest canopy, and then it'll flip and invert to give you a sense that something has gone wrong inside this world, right? But that overview of the forest canopy gets paired with an overview later on of one of the characters' bodies has become completely colonized by fungus, right? And there's this clear linkage between what's happening in this large world to what's happening to your human body, to try and give you a sense of what climate change means for humanity. And that kind of movement visually is important for us to just think about how we represent climate change to ourselves and what it.
Gaia, that film, that's one you introduced me to, and it's on Tubi, and it's amazing. It's an amazing film. Everyone should check it out. Very disturbing, haunting, beautiful in its own way. Like, don't let The Last of Us compare. It's much better than The Last of Us TV show. I would highly recommend it over that.
It's just that when people saw it, and I think it came out, there were a number of just people online going, that's the same idea. But that's because horror shares lots of ideas, right? It just keeps transmitting. And even the distributor of Gaia also the same year released In the Earth, which is another fungal horror. It's also got the same character breakdown. Like, it has a lot of the same elements, but a very different film, and also good and worth checking out.
All right, so let's talk about anti-work horror.
All right. So anti-work horror is generally, the way that I've set it up in the book is horror that's very specifically opposed to work, right? But the way that it represents it, and my example here is Joe Lynch's 2017 film Mayhem, which I'm thinking people might have seen. It was very prominent on Shudder. If you ever see the Shudder banner, right? It was always like right in the middle there.
Yeah, every time you log on, he was right there. Stephen Yoon.
Yep, just staring you down. And the conceit's something you would recognize from any number of horror films where there's a virus that causes rage and violence and so on and so forth, right? But the specificity of this film is that it's inside a law firm. The lawyers get infected. And then they're also the same law firm that made it legal for you to do whatever when you're infected because you aren't responsible for it, right? So that's the sort of overarching conceit, but then it just means that, well, if you're infected, you can just kill your way to the top, right? And that's just what he does. And it's paired in the film then with this other plot of a woman who is having her house foreclosed on. It's a very post-2008 film, right? And he's put in the position of telling her, well, yeah, I can't do anything about it. I know it's wrong. What are you going to do? And so the pair of them are killing their way to the top so she can get her house back. He gets control of the firm, blah, blah, blah. And this doesn't sound like necessarily an anti-work piece, but its whole thing is work sucks. You should kill your boss. And I mean, there are other versions of that. Like Dracula has a lot of like work sucks. You should kill your boss sort of woven through a lot of the adaptations. But for this particular film, it shows how much that, especially in contemporary, we'll say like intellectual work, like service work, it's all about figuring out the rules and then manipulating the rules. Right? And that's all he's doing the whole time. Oh, I can get away with killing these people because I have this excuse and this legal pretext. But the whole idea of the film is like you're infected and you can't control your rage. You never see anyone like, I can't control my rage. It's always like, what if we have a deal? And then, I don't know, I don't like this deal. What if I kill you instead? Like, that's not that's not uncontrollable rage. That's like I'm figuring out what I can do cynically to climb up the ladder. And that's very much how the film presents itself. So when you see what I was trying to draw out from these films is that anti-work tends to be a way that, well, initially, I think in wider culture see it as this must be resistant, but it's not necessarily resistant, right? I mean, if you work in any kind of physical labor job, it sucks. And you go to work and you're like, fuck this job. And like you do it and then you leave and you're like, I'm not thinking about it. Saying fuck this job, very reasonable reaction. It's not the same thing as being directly opposed to work, right? Or saying like we need to get rid of work. And so trying to break those things apart from here are the rules, I'm going to manipulate them as best I can to what's work making me do? Why do I have to work? What can I do so that I don't have to work? Is a very different kind of question.
Let me ask you, this is something we hadn't prepared for, but one of the TV shows that people are talking about is technically kind of an anti-work horror, Severance. Have you seen it? What do you think of it?
I mean, Severance, I got through the first episode of season 1 and then I went, ugh. But it's because it felt so intensely Charlie Kaufman to me that I have this theory that Charlie Kaufman can do Charlie Kaufman and everyone else who does Charlie Kaufman doesn't know where it's going to go. So it felt like they didn't have a direction. I know my partner has been watching it. She got all through season 2 and she's like, man, you made the right choice to leap out after the first episode. I'm like, I told you it wasn't going anywhere good. I keep reading about it, but I know exactly.
That's so funny. That's basically my exact experience. I think I've watched a couple more half episodes while my partner has watched the whole thing and been like, "Oh no, you're not missing anything."
Thank God.
But what I found interesting, and I even think a lot of fans will agree with this, is like people like it because it's something to talk about week to week and it's coming out, and that's kind of if the show is just okay. Like that's kind of enough.
Well, and it puts you in the mindset of work is bad and there's a split between my work life and my home life, which is true, but it doesn't necessarily have, I mean, and this is the thing about any kind of horror. It doesn't have to have a solution, but it should have, I feel like, a point of view. And everything I've read about season 2 was that people got mad because it clearly didn't have a point of view. And it kind of went down this path of it's a cult. Maybe it's better to have this divided self. Maybe work is okay. Maybe I should celebrate my work life and my special workness. And you're like, yeah, man. I mean, that's where it was always going to go because you've got these two kinds of characters. It's always going to be rooting for these two different competing versions of the character. And then you're going to wind up being like, well, maybe you should love your work. Maybe work's great. You're like, no, don't do that.
Yeah, I talk a lot about on the show, right? Like the soap operification of any series that goes on for a certain amount of time, because it doesn't matter whether you start off episode 1, the main villain is like an evil eugenicist. By season 7, he's going to have a romantic relationship with one of the protagonists. It's just, there's nothing, whose father he killed, you know,
Exactly.
there's no place for it to go. It's the same problem that, you know, pro wrestling has as well, you know, like any kind of storytelling. But that's why horror movies and horror films, I think, can be so powerful and poignant, because a lot of them, they end often with the brutal death of all the characters in the movie sometime.
Okay, so have you seen this we didn't talk about this one before, but A Banquet? It's one of these, you know, manage your feeling horrors, but it just is extremely dark, and the end it's working out of that same melodramatic structure, right? So it's within the family. It seems like there's a variety of problems within the family, and these things are being repeated at different generational levels. And then the end just blasts the whole thing away. And it's like, nope, you're fucked. And that is what I like about horror, is that even when especially in these more, the ones that are extremely elevated and using melodrama in the women's film, they are often leading you down that road. And the best ones, I feel like, just yank the rug out right from under you. And they say, like, wouldn't you love this way of thinking that will make you feel better? And it's like, you don't get it. And there's no solution to it, right? So like Jane Schoenbrun's We're All Going to the World's Fair, or Hatching, right? I mean, these films where it wants you to take that melodramatic plot and follow it to its natural conclusion, and then just stabs you right in the heart.
All right, so you mentioned the family. So one of the chapters is about the family genre, which I think has been very popular when you look at film like Hereditary. You already mentioned Babadook. Several of the films that have brought this era of horror to prominence have been about the horror of the modern family. I'm wearing the Twin Peaks t-shirt right now, which is, you know, kind of a progenitor of a lot of this stuff. So tell me about that.
So yeah, elevated horror is interesting because it's, if you look at the Babadook is doing the woman's film, and it's doing melodrama, and it's bringing them together.
Please explain what the woman's film for non-academics, just to be clear. Yes,
right.
yes.
Okay, so the woman's film, woman's film just means a film that it's got a female main character, and it's focused on historically the concerns of women in society at that point in time, right? So it's like it starts in the 1940s, and they were called weepies. So like specifically made for women to go, and then they would be orchestrated to make them cry about, like, you do all you can, and you work as hard as you can, and then you give it all up because that's what your daughter needs. And don't you feel sad at the end, but also good. That's a 40s woman film. And
I do want to pause right here just to mention a vivid memory of cinema going that I have. As far as weeping at the theater goes, when the first time I went to the movies in Japan, I was seeing a samurai drama film. And during the sad scenes, everyone in the theater cries together. Everyone cries together during the sad parts in the scene. I asked my friend who was Japanese, like, why everybody cries? Like, just because it's so sad for everyone to see. He had to give up his, life because, the honor, etc., etc. But like, it was a really interesting shared experience. So it's kind of, like that term weepies kind of makes it feel, but if you were actually there, you probably got something out of it.
Absolutely. Like, I mean, emotion is a shared experience. And so like the film tries to get it out of you through these, I mean, just close-ups of faces will do it, but having it happen all around you is really powerful. It's why I think going to horror films in theaters is so great, right? When it really goes, it really goes. So like the Babadook takes that idea of the woman's film, and that's how it's sort of initially set up. It's focused on our main character. It follows her problem, loss of her husband, her grief, her inability to find time to take care of her grief, the trouble she has raising her child alone in a low-paying job. All these things kind of, ramify and build up. That could be just a basic melodrama. And they add to it this supernatural element of the Babadook, which is just literally a metaphor for grief, right? And this is the thing that makes people mad about elevated horror now. You're just always looking at it and saying, where's the metaphor for grief? But the Babadook does it first, and it does it very well. And how she learns to manage that set of feelings is about making space for, I think, being a woman and thinking about your needs as a human being in relationship to being a parent, and how those things are constantly at odds. So that is really a sort of crucial narrative thing that happens for elevated horror, right? Because if you think about Hereditary, critical reviews of Hereditary were all about how it's like a family drama, right? And that's very much how people came into it. And so when you actually get to watching the film and you do an analysis or just close study of Hereditary, you're like, it's only kind of a family drama. Like, it's really a drama about how the family's constructed by outside forces to screw everyone inside the family, right? Like, we start with that great shot of Peter and Stephen waking up. Peter's waking up in the morning in his bedroom, but we start by going through Annie's workshop of miniatures and then push in very slowly onto one of them, only to have it come alive with the characters, right? And I don't know how people initially read that in theaters, but I bet a lot of people were just like, cool shot, and then forgot about it. And only at the end do you realize, as it pulls back out and shows Peter with all of the cult members around him now possessed by Paimon, in a very like model of the treehouse, that he's been a model figurine toyed with by these outside forces the whole time. So the family is very much in these films something that is a source of control and power. That's new, and that makes it very aligned with Marxist ideas about family abolition and the family as the privatization of care, right? Something that just exploits your ability to care by pushing it on to people inside the family and saying no one else is responsible.
All right, so Capitalism Hates You, Marxism, and the New Horror introduced me to so many great films. Before I let you go, why don't you give us just briefly, what are some fantastic new horror films that not a lot of people have seen that you would recommend?
Oh, let's see. I mean, unfortunately, I watched too many. I'm trying to think of the good ones I've seen recently. Like, let's see. I don't think I'd put Dead Male in there. Free Waka was very interesting. Sinners, of course. I mean, I assume everyone has already seen Sinners.
Yes.
Like, if you haven't seen Sinners, then obviously you need to go see that. I would avoid Nosferatu, the remake, but that's just me.
Oh, that was kind of me too. It was just kind of, yeah.
We could go on about Eggers, but
let's talk briefly. Let's talk briefly. Let's talk brief. I mean, I got a Marxist scholar here. Let's talk Eggers because this is my feeling as a rank amateur, but I feel like I don't know. I just don't think he has a lot to say with his films, and that movie was no different than, it was just like the new Dracula. They could have called it Dracula. This was Universal's latest update, less interesting than the Coppola version, and it's okay.
Yeah, I will say I was mad within the first 3 minutes, so I don't know. If you look at, so I wrote about The Witch in this book, and I watched interviews with Eggers from the release, and already I was kind of pissed at the way he would talk. But his whole conceit for The Witch is that he's just representing how people thought at the time. And one of the problems with that film is the way that he represents how people thought at the time is there are no Native Americans and the land's just there for you to take. And you're like, I don't know if that's you representing what the settlers thought or if that's just what you think. And you see this persistent claim that I'm just representing back what other people thought at the time. He does that with the next film, right? The Lighthouse, where it's really aesthetically beautiful, the choices made to shoot in that way, but it's not a film with that much depth or that much connection to actually thinking through a problem either at the time or now. And then I skipped The Northman because I was mad.
Well, let me say, I can tell you briefly about The Northman because he said the same thing. It's like, I'm representing their beliefs. And that's fine, but the representation ends up basically being like the video game God of War. And I thought it was like a kick-ass action movie. It's fine but it's not really more than that. I actually think it was a mistake to market it as art house. They should have marketed it as the Northman, like a superhero, like store. That was for my positive review of the film. You know, like it's not that arty. It looks cool, but it's just like fun.
I would actually watch it for that. But yeah, but the claim that it's always like, oh, this is how people really thought is just maddening. So then when you start Nosferatu and it's got a highly mobile camera, and because I started life as a Victorianist, I saw the costumes and I went, hold on a second. This is not fucking 1899. This is
My
1830s.
partner as well. My partner was already
like, oh no, what are we doing here? Why are we in the 1830s? Dracula is a story about modernity and the confrontation with modernity. If you push it back to the 1830s, you can do modernity stuff, but it doesn't. And it just avoids it altogether. So like, okay, the original book is all about the past confronting the future and technology. And this one has dick to do with that. And at the same, but we have tons of technology in the film in terms of how the film is made. So instead what you get is this highly mobile camera, and Eggers is not a mobile camera guy up until now. Maybe he does it in The Northman, but like,
yes, yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. But here it's just like he's going through the Victorian streets, and I just got mad immediately. I'm like, so we got a highly mobile camera. We're in the 1830s. What is happening here? And then he doesn't have anything to say about it because he wants to then try to extract some kind of way of thinking from a book by displacing it from the 1890s to the 1830s and then changing the setting. You're like, who are you trying to represent? I don't know whose point of view he's going for in this movie. And so it just felt very exploitative in a variety of ways, including in how it treated its main female character. And anyway, so yeah, I was not a fan.
Yes. All right. So we've taken the detour to, put Eggers in his place. I'm very happy to do that. Briefly, what are some you didn't make this book about the classics. You easily could have. We talked briefly about why. We already talked about why, but what are some classic movies that you think, because we are losing recipes, Josh?
I know.
So there's nothing so basic that you cannot recommend to our young listeners to tell them they should go and check out and watch if they're young Marxists interested in horror.
If you are a young Marxist interested in horror, you should absolutely track down basically everything associated with Val Lewton. So, I mean, the most famous one's Cat People, but White Zombie, I Walked with a Zombie, and one of my favorites, The Seventh Victim, which is an amazing film and not seen enough. I think Criterion just re-released it. You got to look at all the Romero Dead films, right? Night, Dawn, Day. Don't forget about
Best
Day.
one.
I love Day of the Dead, and it's like, I don't think that one gets enough love. It's, where else are you going to see the leader of the American military torn limb from limb by zombies and just start going, yeah! That's what that movie's for. You have to see Alien, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I would go with the 70s version over the 50s version.
Ooh, interesting. I like the 50. I think
like
the
the
50s. Yeah, I think the 50 version is a little bit less sexist. I liked it a little bit more for that reason.
Okay, I'll give you that. I mean, the 70s are a bad time for gender politics. And Carpenter's, The Thing, They Live. And if you're looking for a I'll throw in my weird pairing. I'm convinced that Wes Craven was trying to do something better in how horror dealt with race when he tried to do The Serpent and the Zombie, that he got screwed by the studio, and then he made People Under the Stairs. I think that there's like an interesting sort of trajectory from Serpent and the Rainbow, People Under the Stairs, and Scream, where like eventually becomes just extremely white meta horror, almost as a commentary on the genre itself and what was allowed to be made. So I think those are useful too.
And ultimately spawned the Scary Movie series by the Wayans brothers before they got screwed out of it by their studio and now being brought back. It keeps happening. It keeps happening. So, Capitalism Hates You, Marxism, and the new horror film. Joshua Gooch, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you?
They can find me on Blue Sky at Joshua Gooch, and they can find me at joshuagooch.com. I have like a professional website. I don't know.
Also, do you still have to have one of those? I feel like you have to. I mean, all the other websites are owned by Nazis, but they're the only websites that people go to. So
They are, and so I just like I have this one, so I always know that it's there. And I'm old enough that I remember like if you had your own, if you could own your own web address, that it was worth doing. So that's my age.
all right, folks. Thank you so much for joining me. This is a wonderful conversation. We'll have to have you back on sometime, a commentary or something. I would love to talk
Please.
to you more. And hey, don't you have a radio show as well? Don't you have your own show?
I don't.
I did. Who I look? I was. It was there a different person? I thought you had. I was trying to look you up. Maybe it was something. Maybe it was a different Joshua Gooch.
There is a Joshua Gooch blues guitarist who's like half my age, and I
I
don't know
did
what
see
he's
him.
doing.
That guy. Okay, that might have been a mix.
Maybe
I
that's
saw the
him.
blues. I saw the blues guitarist. I was like, oh, that's a cool looking dude
yeah.
too. Yeah. All right, folks. That's Struggle Session. Have a good one. Peace. See, I told you that was a good one. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. Thank you all so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and want to support the show, get hundreds of bonus episodes, commentaries, all that good stuff, ad-free. Just subscribe at patreon.com/.
Struggle Session.